NTNU in Trondheim, Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and what I do is bring European projects together in various ways, or tear them apart in various ways. This is happening as we speak, but anyway, ignore that. What I'm going to talk about this morning is not quite what the title suggests in the programme. That was a really boring title when I looked at it, so I've decided not to call it that. But what I'm going to be talking about is a thing called Heimdall's Quest, and it's basically a games-based, what we're calling a motivational challenge system. A colleague of mine, Jason Reedy, who works in Norway, he's American, but he's been there for about 20 years, so he's classified as a Norwegian now. He works in a school, Heimdall Upper Secondary School, in the vocational strand, doing IT and digital media. And his problem that he was faced with in his classes was low interest, low motivation. As in most European countries, the vocational track is always a second-class track, which is wrong in my opinion, but that's what happens. So boys particularly become demotivated. It's normally between the ages of 16 and 18, but it goes a little bit younger and older either way. But they become demotivated, they don't engage with the work, and a lot of them tend to drop out before they finish their courses, which is obviously problematic in the long term for their career prospects. So Jason wanted to do something about this, and he comes from he's much younger than me, he's a gamer, he comes from a video games background in some ways, and he knew instinctively that most of his students, over 90%, spent a lot of their free time playing video games at home. Not the sort of politically correct things, of course, the shoot 'em up kind of games, zombie Nazis and all that stuff. But nevertheless, they were playing games and they were very good at it, and they knew a lot about games. So he thought, okay, let's bring these into the classroom. But he also realized that trying to co-opt games into teaching content is not necessarily the way to go, because in some ways it's patronizing. Students see it as somebody trying to sneak maths or science in through the back door and try and teach it in a kind of trendy way, like using Facebook to teach and things like that. And they don't really like it sometimes. So rather than do that, which in any case is really complicated, he decided to have a games-based platform for very simple things that go on in the classroom, like attendance. So attendance is a really boring word. Now, attendance register, tick. You've come into school, tick. What's so important about that? Well, actually, it is really important. If you're not there, you're not going to learn anything. Well, you might learn something at home, but essentially you can't participate unless you turn up. We still live in a world where physical appearance and physical presence, face-to-face meetings are still really important, and the best way to communicate, way ahead of any electronic technology. So turning up is really important. But in Norway, you don't get credit for attendance. You get credit negatively for not turning up. So you get a black mark if you don't appear in school. And in fact, there are quite strict regulations as to the amount of time you can be absent, and you can be quite heavily penalized in the system if you don't turn up on a regular basis. So his system, first and foremost, just gives you some credit for turning up. It gives you air miles, it's points, he calls them experience points, and I noticed recently that KLM have adopted this term for what you get for your air miles, so it's an interesting terminology that's spreading, but we'll come back to that later. So avatars are part of the system, and I wanted to focus on that today because you're talking about identity a lot. And in thinking about identity, Jason didn't start from an academic perspective on identity. He started from simple ideas like attendance and behavior in the classroom and so on. But avatars are a big feature of video games. You have your on-screen avatar that can do all sorts of things that you can't do. And so in terms of identity, he started to bring in a lot of possible theoretical perspectives that, until we started working together, hadn't really mattered and he hadn't thought about. But we realized that we could do a lot of different things with the idea of an avatar. So first of all, to avoid me talking too much, I'm going to get you to acquire an avatar. And there's a very easy way of doing that. So if you turn to the person next to you, find out what their name is, and swap names. Okay, you've got 30 seconds to do that. So for the rest of this hour, you will take the name of the person next to you. Okay? Okay, you got it? We'll come back to that. I find it really difficult to remember names. I'm absolutely hopeless at it, and some of you are probably much better at it. Some of you might be, like me, terrible memory. So we'll come back to that, and you can remind each other of your names in a few minutes. But keep that name in mind for the moment. We'll come back to it in a minute. Okay, so yeah, I've basically explained this. The system has been in use now for about 3 years. It actually started out, it wasn't a games-based system at all. It was done on a spreadsheet. It's not essential to have a very complicated and interesting-looking graphical interface, although it does have one now, and I'll show you that in a minute. But it's been used in 5 different schools. We've used it with elementary schools, with lower secondary, with vocational and academic tracks in upper secondary, and it's worked. So that's the main thing to say about it. It does work, it's proven, it's up and running. I'm not going to spend any time on the technology, so don't worry about that. Won't get into coding or anything like that. But it's effective. And so instead of saying we've got a research project to find out if this works, we've got a project to find out how we can make it work better and how we can make it work in different countries. So at the moment, it's very much Norwegian-centric, if you like. It's based on Norse mythology. The characters in the game are Norse gods and Norse warriors and druids. Hopefully that has some resonance in Wales, I guess.
Yeah.
Druids. It's the Norwegian spelling is druid. So it sounds Welsh to me. But anyway, some nice mythical characters. But how does that transfer? And we're working with Spanish partners at the moment, and we've got the proposal that Alan mentioned I'm working on is to take it to Spain primarily and also to Romania and see if we can adapt the mythology and the language to their own ontology, to a mythology that works for Spanish people, for Spanish students, or a mythology that works in Romania. Now, everybody has one somewhere, and we'll dig it out of the cupboard and put it on the screen and then see if we can get students to be comfortable with it. So we've gone in the kind of reverse direction to a normal research project. So Jason's a very practical guy, and because he's an American, he just gets on and does things. He developed this to solve a problem. He then did his master's thesis on it and brought in some theory about motivation and about flow, if anybody knows what that is. We'll come again, that gets mentioned later on. He brought those things together in his thesis, which showed that it worked and had some feedback from students, essentially. And then when I heard about this from his supervisor, in fact, I got interested and brought him into another project to do the IT part of that. And we spent a lot of time talking about it. And we realized that this had applications beyond the school classroom. We couldn't necessarily take the mythology that the system is built on at the moment and plonk that down in, say, an industrial situation, but we could take the underlying principles. And that started to get very exciting as well, because identity, you work in a factory, for example. My son works for Jaguar Land Rover in Solihull, not too far from here. And people in the factory there do a job. They've got an identity, but they're not academics and they don't spend all day thinking about it. They don't have that luxury. But actually it's very important to them. But they don't have a vehicle for expressing it and for using it creatively. And one of the things that we think we can do with the MCS is to produce a system whereby people can handle their identities in new ways. So that brings me to another exciting practical activity. I want 2 volunteers. I'm not telling you what you're volunteering for yet. 1, 2, right. what I'd like you to do is to move the coat rack, which you see over there. It's on wheels, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Move it round to the front of the stage here. And Alan, can I borrow your hybrid researcher person? Because
Certainly.
that was exactly what I had in mind when I was thinking about drawing, but it's much more artistic than my version. So you can stick it up
Yeah,
there
go for it, yeah.
somewhere. Then, does everybody have a bit of paper? Doesn't matter what kind of paper, just a bit of paper that you can write on.
There's Alan, but
Oh, there's bits flying around. Good. Bring it forward. Fantastic. Thank you. Round of applause for our volunteers. Thanks very much. Okay, so this is not a coat rack. Pinched out from Foucault. And I should sack myself for mentioning Foucault. It's just as an aside, I used to review papers for the Teacher Education Strand in the European Educational Research Conference. And I used to throw out anybody who mentioned Foucault, because they were becoming very cliche-ridden with Foucault. Anyway, this is not a coat rack, this is an avatar. So, that's a funny-looking avatar. It doesn't look much like a person. It's not nearly as person-like as your hybrid arts researcher there, but nevertheless, it's an avatar. So, I'll throw that question to you. Why is it like an avatar? Ah, that's got you. It's a thing, yeah, it's a separate thing, that's right. Separate is very important, that's a good word. It's sort of alive, because it moved with a bit of assistance. The main reason it's an avatar is that you can hang things on it. And the idea of the avatar in the game system, any game system really, is that you can hang things on it that are not yours. So can I borrow somebody's coat? Anybody got a coat that they're not wearing? Thank you.
All right.
Thanks very much. I'll give it back. Yeah, you don't. Okay.
Always on the move.
Is it okay if I wear it briefly? Not because it's cold. Alan's done a good job keeping the heat in. Okay. So, okay. I'm just wearing your coat. So what? It's cold. I'll borrow your coat. No problem. But, okay, let's take it off. And let's hang it on here. Okay, so the avatar now has an identity component based on your coat, which gives you a certain style. And this could be a druid's coat. In the game, the druid's coat can have magical powers. Your coat probably just keeps you warm and looks quite smart, but or maybe not. Which, whatever you think, it doesn't really matter. That's right. But this could be a druid's coat. This could be a magic coat that makes you invisible. And so you can wear this in class and you can do things that you couldn't do without it. So this is the kind of principle that we're working on here, that in the system, probably today, I won't go into the details of it because it's quite complicated, but in the system, basically, as a student, you acquire an identity over time. You have to earn that identity. You don't just get it first day, come into school. You build it up over time, and your identity is based on qualities that you have and things that you do and activities that you participate in. So your coat, your druid's coat, is quite expensive. You might have to spend half the term doing a project with your colleagues and working on that in evenings and so on. But eventually you will get credited for your effort in that project, and you can purchase the coat. You can acquire the magic powers. Okay, let's hang something else on there. Who's got a reasonably large piece of paper in their pad in front of them or something like that you can afford to? Sorry, I don't want to tear it up. Okay, thank you. Okay, now you have, keep the paper. You don't have to give it to me yet. You know what your name is based on the earlier exercise, right? Okay, I want you to write on the paper without asking your companion, one quality that that person has without consultation. That's what. Okay, thank you. Okay. Open-minded. Good. So, that's exactly... Hang it on this end.
Need some tape, Peter?
No, I think it was fold over. Okay, so already the avatar is building up some qualities. He's got a magic coat that makes him or her invisible, and he or she is open-minded. That's very important, because in class, one of the things that we want to do... I've realised this is a stupid place for me to have that. Sorry. Park it over here. Can you still see? Or...
Yeah, no, I can still see Peter.
Okay. Being open-minded is part of the whole thing of critical thinking, asking questions in class, and most importantly, listening to other people. And again, that's not something that students normally get credited for. So if you're an argumentative, self-assertive, noisy person, that's a nuisance in class. If you're a listening person who takes in the views of other people, reflects them back to them, helps them understand what they're trying to do in a particular piece of work, that's a positive quality, and the system allows you to get credit for that. One thing I should point out is that it's mostly driven by teachers. Teachers become gods in the system, which teachers will appreciate. They get a bit of credit as well. And teachers basically award these points, which have different names, different levels. But students also have the possibility of voting to give points to their friends if they've been particularly supportive, and they can use their points to support a friend who's in need. So I was talking about this with Alan last night, and I came up with the example of a student who doesn't turn up one day in class, and the teacher, when he comes back, says, why didn't you turn up yesterday? And he said, well, I had to look after my brother. He's got some mental health issues, and I needed to stay at home with him. Now, in a normal school system, you wouldn't get any credit for that. You'd just be ticked off for not turning up. But in Heimdall's Quest, there is the possibility that you can be awarded some credit because you did a good thing. It was a learning experience probably for you. It was as valuable as being in school that day, so you should get some credit for that. So again, the system allows that possibility. Okay, when we started thinking about the theory of this, I was dissatisfied with the accepted wisdom on motivation. If you come across a paper in motivation, mostly they'll mention Deci and Ryan 2000 or some spin-off from that, and that sort of stuff about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, which I think, and there are other people out there who also think this, I think that's rubbish. It's not a distinction that you can actually sustain, but anyway, one of the things that's kind of a three-dimensional model which involves competence, relationality and autonomy, and these are important qualities, but unless you're doing some kind of instrument or questionnaire on motivation, they're not words that come into the student imagination. So students don't generally think about competence as an abstract thing. They might know that they're good at something, but they don't think about competence in a meta-cognitive way or in an abstract way. Similarly, relationality. You don't hear students talking about relationality, but you hear them talking about their friends all the time. They do stuff on their phones, they're socially networked, so they're intrinsically very, very relational, but again, they don't think about that. And again, there is no provision in the normal classroom for that relationality to be used positively. So the system allows students to work together and to receive credit for working together, for having a strong, positive kind of relationality.